Hey, how's it going, everybody? Max DeVincenzo here of Fox Tracks Music. I am starting to do some of these session breakdowns, which I'm very excited for. Finally got my setup going here. This first one I wanted to talk about and kind of show you all the ins and outs of is for the Nutrition Mechanic podcast. They do nutrition for athletes, long distance runners, marathoners, that kind of thing. And some of the specs they included in the brief were the Breaking Bad theme, so kind of that earthy, gritty feel. And so I want to walk you through kind of my process, how I go about composing music for different brands and for different destinations, and then break down the session for you. So real quick, I just want to show you a couple of different versions of the same theme, or a couple different directions, I'll say, of this music that we could have gone in. This is the first thing that I came up with, and I don't think it fits the podcast exactly, maybe a different podcast, but what this allowed me to do is create a custom instrument palette for the Nutrition Mechanic, and that's what you see here. So if this client comes back to me looking for more music or any kind of stinger or transition or anything like that, I'll build it from the same session using, it's kind of the same as a color palette, right? These same instruments that I developed for the Nutrition Mechanic sound. So here's our first try. Right, so it has that earthy feel. It has a lot of world elements, which I really enjoy. This is kind of what inspired me to use a banjo for the theme, which is really interesting. Not something that I would immediately think of for a podcast, especially not this kind of podcast, but it kind of works. It's playing almost a non-traditional banjo part in some ways, so it makes it unique, which I enjoy. We also have taiko drums, some African shaker, dilruba, which is a beautiful stringed instrument from India. Maybe it might be plains on there. We're going to come back to that. And then what else we have going on here? Bass and some percussion. So kind of starting to develop a sound palette here. Let's go to our second example. This is a totally different direction, which I try to do. If my first thing that I send the client is over here, second option should be almost like wildly different, just to kind of get a little bit of a range going. So here's this, and I warn you, this is not mixed. So way too epic for this podcast. Maybe a different podcast, who knows? If you have a podcast that would fit, it's yours, you can have it. Just kidding. So that was kind of the second try that I had, and that introduced the strings that I ended up using in the final version. We had some electric guitar in there I was messing around with. It was just a bit too heavy for the final product. Anything else we introduced there? Looks like we lost the taiko and the shaker, and kept the banjo. Okay, so let's listen to our final version here. This is the one with the melody. This is kind of the direction that I ended up going in, and this feels like a really good blend of the different moods and energies that we had used in the past, instrumentation that I really enjoy, that same kind of sound palette, and this fit the mood of the podcast. So when I started writing this, I knew I was in the right zone, heading in the right direction, and the client loved it. Great, so that's starting to feel good. It's a lot more light and airy, has like almost a mystical element to it. Feels really wide, strident, feels very world still, and it feels very organic. So I like all of those elements. And yeah, I was very happy with how this turned out. So let's break down some of the instruments here. We'll just go from the top down. And I'm going to break down this session layout, but I think it's a little bit too much for this breakdown today. We'll talk about all the routing of these MIDI channels and these audio channels down here and the instruments, but different time. So if we go through, we have a bunch of percussion. Let's just check out the percussion for now. We have taiko and shaker kind of holding down some of the pulse, and then also djembe, congas, and I think just a kick drum here. So this is kind of our foundation. Little slide there. So this feels almost like African Sahara kind of stuff. It feels like very open and has a nice drive to it, not too fast. Great, so that's our percussion. We also have our banjo part, which again, I never thought I was going to use banjo, but here we are. Taking care of some of the harmonic content, just a nice pulse as well. Nothing too crazy, some nice finger picking there. For the melody, that's an interesting mix. We have dilruba, duduk, and fiddle. So let me actually layer those in one by one. So here's just the dilruba, beautiful instrument. The duduk, a little bit more mid-range that is, and then fiddle, a little bit of the bottom. So here's everything together. Again, feels very wide, very open. All right, so that's our melody. For the strings, these are really fun. If I remember correctly, these just have a bunch of reverb just to make it last a really long time and ring out, and they're just there for some color. Feels expansive to me. Again, open. I think if there's one word for this, it feels open, it feels strident, kind of the same thing there. Excuse me, Mr. Ozzy, what are you doing down there? This is Oslo. He doesn't know how to be quiet in the studio yet. He's just a puppy, but that's okay. So our strings. What else do we have going on here? Oh, our bass. I love this bass tone. I spent a long time getting this right. So this is what this sounds like without any plugins on it, just dry. And then we'll put our plugins back on. So I wanted something a lot more prominent and kind of non-traditional bass tone. Almost sounds like a fretless bass a little bit, but not quite. It's warm and airy. Has a nice stereo image too, which is not common for bass sounds. So one more time, everything together. And by the way, we have a version without melody and a version with melody, just in case I had voiceover over the beginning of their podcast. I'll play the version with the melody. All right. Well, thank you for watching. I hope that was helpful. I hope it gave you some inspiration, some ideas for your next composition or production. If you have any questions, please let me know, and we'll see you next time.